Cool, we're live. So, hi everyone, and welcome to our ECS Ask Me Anything summer session. Today's session is going to be on customer experience, or CX for short. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day to join us, to join our session today. So, as some of you may know, this was penciled in as our second session of the Ask Me Anything summer series. But we had a bit of a technical mishap last week, which meant that this is now our first one. So, I'm really hoping that we've got more than 4 minutes of video to share with you today. So today I'm delighted to be joined by two of our experts within the ECS CX practice. We've got Ian Hartwell, a senior CX consultant, and we've got John Ing, as our CX product owner. So both John and Ian are experienced in transforming some of our clients' customer experience, specifically by utilising the cloud. So please feel free to ask any questions that you might have in the YouTube live chat. And we'll aim to get through these questions in the session today. I'll be monitoring the chat and directing the questions to Ian and John. So I'm now going to let our experts introduce themselves. So I'll start with Ian. If you could let us know a bit about yourself and how you got into the CX space.
Yeah, hi. So I first started with a quite a well-known high street bank. I think it's about 17 or 18 years ago now. Where I was looking after MI production and workforce management within a contact center. That kind of moved on a little bit in terms of I was then in charge of creating changes on that contact center, making improvements from within the business. Then I moved out into the technology area of that bank to run large scale projects and doing migrations from Aspect to Cisco. I joined ECS just under 2 years ago now to do a similar sort of thing with Amazon Connect. So I go from the point of looking at the customers' journeys, what they want to do, and I translate those into technical requirements. So how can we achieve what the end goal is?
That sounds great. What about you, John?
Yeah, hi guys. So slightly older than Ian, been around a little bit longer. And from a contact center point of view, my journey started about 25 years ago. A credit card company was looking to build and start using ACD technology, so contact center technology. I was fortunate enough to be involved in some of the early implementations of IVR, the press 1, press 2 for that 25 years ago, outbound dialing, etc. And I've gone on from now. And I spent, prior to joining ECS, which I joined back end of 2019, so relatively new into ECS, I spent the last 17 years in a large retail bank. And the last things I was doing is building out cloud contact center technology for them.
Cool. That sounds great. Thank you very much for both of you for joining today. So I'm now going to jump into the questions. And as I mentioned before, please post any questions that you might have for John and Ian in our YouTube chat, and I'll present them to our panel. But I wanted to start off with a question that is quite topical, and it's around the current pandemic situation with COVID-19. And I was wondering, what do you think the customer experience has been during COVID-19? And what do you think the learnings will be from both the customer and the business side?
Do you want me to take that one, Ali? So,
yeah,
for me, I think first and foremost, I think the customer experience has been extremely poor. And that's based on the impact that not only we're all customers of all various different companies and services, but also organizations themselves have had to deal with the lockdown. So if we go back to where we were in March, literally overnight, companies and organizations and people were being told to stay at home, work from home. That becomes quite difficult in a contact center, which is typically housed out of a large building. And parallel to that, obviously, you had people unfortunately falling ill through the virus itself. And that combination created an element of chaos, I guess, and had a major impact. Call volumes were going through the roof in some instances, or dropping off a cliff in others. So it wasn't the same for everybody. And throughout that, you hear horror stories of wait times being in the hours, and organisations deflecting customers to use their other channels. Now, on the first face of it, that probably was not great. But I think one of the things that's come out of this, and I do think this is a real learning, and I think will stand us all in good stead going forwards, is the ability for us all as individuals to adapt. And I think, at a human level, we've all adapted and started to work through how do we navigate this, what's been sort of muted as the new normal. And we become more adept at using new technologies. The amount of people using things like Zoom or House Party. You've got all various different generations within families communicating through technology that they've never even used before. And I think that's a really good thing to have happened. If you can take away the panic and the pandemic, that would be really good. But bring on the learnings from that. And I think that's the thing for me going forwards is the ability and the way that we as customers will now consume services from organisations, and the ability for us to move across. And you talk about omni-channel. For me, one of the things I'm trying to push out there it's not about an omni-channel, it's about an omni-customer. And for me, it's about the ability for customers to be able to move between the right ways they want to interact with organisations, depending on the need, the urgency, the complexity, etc. So I think the experience was poor and very poor, and in some senses still poor today because it's not fixed. But I think we're learning and adapting as we go forwards, and that's for me what we want to take forwards.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think about 2 weeks into the lockdown, I saw a meme which was, what's driving your business's digital transformation? Is it the CEO, CTO, or is it COVID-19? That made me chuckle a little bit, but it's really true. And it's a shame that that's what's triggered it. But a lot of companies now are looking at their existing technology and going, is this still fit for purpose these days? A lot of we got very busy in a very short amount of time with customers wanted to move their on-prem contact centers out into the cloud just to allow agents to work from home and to continue servicing their customers.
So, Ian, do you see this as a long-term change, or do you see companies reverting back to maybe the traditional contact centers that they had before?
What we've seen so far, majority are seeing this as a long-term change. They're seeing the benefits that they're getting from moving into the cloud and the flexibility of what they can do and what they can introduce to improve customer service. There's still a few out there that are a little bit reluctant, and I think that's around their concern about their data, basically having their data out in the cloud. AWS is fully compliant on a lot of regulations, but there are those companies out there still that are a little bit nervous around that.
Do you have anything to add on that, John?
No, I totally agree with what Ian's saying. I do think it is a shame, and I think it is very relevant what Ian was talking about. COVID-19 has been a real catalyst, and we've seen catalysts in the past. Typically something needs to be broken, or you need to have a bit of a burning platform to enforce change. And albeit we haven't necessarily got a burning platform, we've got a pandemic that has created a need for change. The business continuity plans and disaster recovery plans that a lot of contact centers would have had in place, all of a sudden, they became probably null and void because the scenario wasn't necessarily expected and hadn't been planned for. And I think people will now be looking at going forwards, and again, to embrace technology. And where we've had customers that are already on a cloud journey, I think they're accelerating that cloud journey. So they were always bought into the idea of moving to the cloud, and I think they're accelerating that. I think companies that were probably looking at it and hadn't done anything, I think are now very seriously looking at it. And the key thing for me is that you need to be careful you don't get left behind in that scenario. So if something was like this to happen again, we want us all to be in a much better place going forwards.
Yeah, that makes sense. So this question might be more for you, Ian. How does the cloud help improve customer experience within organizations?
It's more the AWS ecosystem and the number of services that are available to plug into Amazon Connect. So from within Amazon Connect, you've got there's two main streams out from it, I think. So there's Lambdas, which are kind of serverless bits of code that you can run. And from that Lambda, you can pretty much do anything. So if anything's got an API, you can go and ping it. I played around at home with my home automation stuff. When a call started to queue, my lights at home started to flash. Totally useless, I think, in this situation, but it was just to prove that you can do the unthinkable with it. So in terms of improving the customer experience, it gives you the platform to be able to go out and play and try new things without having to invest a lot of time and money. So voice biometrics, for example, historically you'd have to have hardware installed in one of your data centers to be able to just run a proof of concept. You couldn't just literally plug it in using some infrastructure as code, and stand it up within days or even hours potentially. So yeah, it's around the AWS ecosystem, what it can connect to and connect with, which just gives you the speed of change and the ability of different things to do, and the customization that you can then give to that customer.
Yeah, sounds good. So a bulk of your experiences come from Amazon Connect, is that right?
Past 2 years have been Amazon Connect. So Amazon Connect only launched in 2017, so it's about 3 years old now. My history is more around the old Aspect and Cisco platforms.
Cool, that makes sense. I see we've got a question around tooling. I'm not sure if you're aware of any other tools that offer similar capabilities that people could explore, or whether Amazon is one you've got most experience with clients.
Yeah, I've mostly been working with Amazon, to be honest. CloudFormation, templates, pipelines, such. I haven't really touched anything outside of that.
But Ali, there's a number of cloud capabilities out in the marketplace today. There's Amazon Connect, as we talk about. There's Night in Contact. There's 8x8. There's Genesis Cloud. There's Twilio. So there's a lot in the marketplace, and a lot of organisations and the traditional vendors that you would possibly have as an on-premise or a hosted solution are definitely moving in that direction as well, because of some of the benefits that Ian's just talked about. That pace and the flexibility of being able to spin things up and learn very, very quickly is really, really important. If you want to move and react to customer behaviours and what's happening within the market, you need the technology to be able to enable that. And this is the thing for me that cloud really starts to bring to life. And that was one of the things that really attracted me to looking at sort of different cloud technologies, etc. Is being able to do that quick learning, adaptability piece. At the same time, also taking some cost out. There are some cost benefits as well.
Yeah, it's really important to have that technology to sort of back up the change in process, I guess. So we've got another question through about what are your thoughts on AI increasingly being used in the CX space? Does it worry you from a job security point of view, or is this a chance for organizations to upscale?
I think for me, I think there's a huge opportunity here, and there is a balance to be played. Yeah, I think there's a role of artificial intelligence, and you can see that in improving, and in some instances, it should be driven by improving customer experience. That should be the motive for me. So if you can create a more seamless and less friction type engagement from a customer point of view, and artificial intelligence enables you to do that, then you should do that. Because I think, and what we are learning, and personal experiences, a few years ago there was a view that people would stop using the phone, and that's not happening. And it's not a generational thing. It's not old people use the phone and young people use the internet. Actually, it's not. It's dependent on the circumstance and the context. And people are still phoning. People still need to talk to humans, and I think that's where organisations that have got contact centres need to be providing the right skills, the right people to support and enable them to answer the customer questions and queries that they've got. They'll tend to be probably more complex. They'll tend to be, there might be more of a sensitive or personal nature, etc., that can't be done through an AI. So I think there is a role for both, and it's about how companies and organisations apply the technology in the right spaces. And from an agent perspective, I think it'll move them up the food chain a little bit in providing, hopefully more fulfilling, customer engagements for them as well. So I think there's a positive there. That'd be my view.
Yeah, and I think from a technology point of view, I'm probably stepping away a little bit from AI, but in terms of moving things into the cloud, you actually widen your ability to recruit as well. So you haven't just got a contact center in Birmingham, for example. You could have a contact center throughout the country, and bring people in as and when you need to, and again through different channels, so through voice or chat, SMS, and so on. Yeah,
so AI is probably more there to support the the contact centers changing rather than to replace agents on the phone.
Yeah.
And I think you'll also see, Ali, where AI will be supporting agents. Yeah. So it's not about providing the interface between a customer and AI. Actually, AI can provide information to agents to make sure they've got the right information, the right contextual information based on what the customer's asking them, and therefore provide a much more enriched customer experience. So artificial intelligence doesn't replace, actually it enhances and probably improves the ability of that customer experience.
Yeah, I think that's something you see across a lot of technology as well, is that AI isn't there to replace, it's there to assist almost just now. Okay, so we've got another question around what have been the most common mistakes that you've seen with organizations moving their customer experience to the cloud?
I'll start that one, I think. So I think the first one is a lot of people see it as a migration instead of a transformation. So they take what they've got on-prem and then they just lift and shift it and put it in the cloud. And they kind of miss out on the massive opportunity they've got of having a wide open platform to work with. There's also some points around kind of they expect the cloud to be extremely scalable instantly, which is very scalable. I wouldn't say it's quite as instant. So like AWS, for example, they implement service quotas so that they still have to capacity plan for themselves to ensure that all customers get a consistent service. So I think a lot of people have gone in not realizing, actually we've got service quotas to think about, like number of concurrent calls is the most common one. I think by default you're allowed 5 or 10, which isn't a lot when you first get started. But all you need to do then is raise a ticket and say, here's my use case, I'm going to be taking this many calls, and they'll ramp that up. And that also helps out AWS do their capacity planning as well.
I think I'll build on that point, Ian. So that it's not a migration. I totally agree with it. And the word I tend to use is adoption, because one of the advantages you can do with cloud technology, because of the no need for any infrastructure investment from an organization point of view, you can build something in the cloud, make sure it works, make sure it does what you want to do all that quick learning that I mentioned earlier, and then you as a customer or an agent or whatever it might be, you can then adopt that service and start consuming it. And as Ian says, I think not thinking big enough can sometimes constrain organizations, and also thinking about where you want to get to. So yes, you need to think about the here and now, and start small is what we advocate. But actually bearing that in mind in where you want to get to. So what's the vision? What's your press release is a term that we tend to use a lot, is what's your press release in 18 months time? What does this mean? Organization A is winning customer sats surveys, or #1 in customer service award ceremonies and things like that, because they're providing that fantastic customer experience, and underpinning that is the technology. And joining them all together, I think, is important. If you do it piecemeal, it can take you a long time and probably gets a bit clunky. But for me, it's about starting small, thinking about it as an adoption and making the best use of it, but also thinking big about where you want to get to.
Yeah, that makes sense. So obviously when you're starting small, you're mitigating some of the risks involved as well. What do you see as the biggest risks in moving to the cloud?
I think for me, and sort of Ian mentioned it a bit earlier, is, and it's not necessarily a risk, I think it's about getting a better understanding. A lot of focus around data, and make sure that you as a company totally understand what that means. People have a bit of a nervousness about operating within a public cloud, but it's about understanding what does that really mean, and how do you make sure you protect your customer data or your organizational data, and make sure it's secure, using all the right tools and techniques to support that. So that can be seen as a big risk to start with, and any organizations looking at that, they probably need to tick that one off quite early in the conversations, because that will probably hit them down the line, and therefore understanding what that means from a data and security perspective. So that'd be my view.
Yeah, I think data protection and GDPR is one of the biggest concerns in the software industry as a whole, I suppose. So if I was going to get started in building a proof of concept using Amazon Connect or any other tool, how would I go about getting started?
I say this a lot, and it seems really blunt, but just go and have a play. So anyone can go and set up an AWS account. You can spin up a Amazon Connect instance within 15 minutes maximum and get calls coming into you. There are a lot of guides out there. So Amazon Connect already does a pretty decent job of your very first kind of, this is how it works. But there are a number of blogs out there, and shameless plug, I've done one, where you just follow this blog. It explains step by step kind of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And hopefully it'll give you some ideas of how you can use that to apply what you need to do. As I said, anyone can do that. That blog I wrote, I actually tested out my wife, who's not technical in the slightest, and she followed it really easily. She's really chuffed that she managed to set up a call center by herself and can finally see what I've been going on about for the past 17 years.
Yeah, that sounds like a good way to get started. Have you seen any sort of cool developments that people are adding on, or plugins or anything like that for the technology? I know you mentioned you had your lights flashing or something earlier, but anything like that?
So there's been quite a few instances of connected with Amazon Pinpoint, and it's a service within AWS that allows SMS messaging, emails, like campaign management. But they've used that to integrate with contact center to trigger outbound calls. I've also seen people use Alexa skills to say, my utility company, can you please call me? And then they'll get a call back like within 5 seconds of actually issuing that command. Yeah, John, I don't know if you've heard of any more that you can think of.
No, I think, yeah, I mean, the Alexa skill, I think, is, and I can see that growing. So being able to ask, and it doesn't have to be Alexa, it could be Siri or Google or whatever your preference is. But, it is about bringing that technology together. And I think, natural language is a good one, being able to create chatbots and, spin up chatbots extremely quickly. And again, back to the COVID situation, chatbots are being used a lot to help customers navigate and get access to information. And again, you can do that very, very quickly. And it's the ability of, it uses text to speech, which is a real powerful tool. You don't have to do any real coding or anything like that. You just type something in a box, literally, and it turns it into speech for you. So you can create sort of an IVR menu very, very quickly using natural language. And for me, that really brings that to life, and I've seen a lot of that. And then the next one would be things like being able to integrate using APIs to biometric providers in the cloud, and being able to start looking at things like IDMV, etc., because that's a real clunky journey for a lot of organizations. And being able to get to look at that very, very quickly is really, really powerful. And probably last one, which I think is, again, something that, and a question I tend to ask a lot of contact center people is, do you know why your customers are contacting you? Which tends to be the hardest question for them to answer. They've got a lot of data, but being able to ask that question is quite difficult. And with this technology, because you can see the data real time, and you can start to do some mining that data very quickly using some of the tools that are available, you can start to get an understanding why your customers are contacting you, and also how they're feeling, and getting that sentiment. Being able to do that, I was involved in an exercise where we spun something up literally within 4 days, and getting a sentiment analysis and understanding why customers are calling an organization, and that was really powerful.
So how do you see, now that you can collect that data, how do you see that sort of informing business decisions and further down the line?
Well, I think for me, it's that feedback loop all of a sudden becomes much, much shorter. And again, because you can change the technology faster, and typically this is going in hand with agile methodologies and DevOps, etc. And having that data that you can get, literally. So if they take natural language as a good example, you're not going to find, and you're not going to have to plan for every eventuality on day one. Your customer's going to say something you hadn't thought about, or you hadn't expected. But getting that data that day, you can then very quickly do something to change that, and therefore that would then be a positive experience for a customer the next day, as it were. So for me, that is really, really powerful. And you just got to extrapolate that of what that might mean when you start pulling that data from other areas as well from that conversation.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. It's always good to have the data to back up your business or your business decisions further down the line. So what do you both see as being the next big thing within CX? Where do you see the future of CX going?
That's a really good question. I think there's still a lot of work to be done based on where we are today. We've talked about a couple of things there. I think the chatbots. I think there's a lot going to happen in that space. I think there's huge opportunities both from a customer's perspective and also an organizational perspective to leverage that type of technology. So I think you'll see chat. And again, one of the things that I see is that this is not instead of something else. I think it's it complements all the other channels. So again, back to that view of organizations need to enable customers to interact with how they want to based on the context and the situation. And therefore, chat will be an enabler of that. The next thing I think is back to that human adaptability. I think we as humans have probably become a bit used to video conferencing. And therefore, the appetite of people to use video as a means of contact, I think, is probably grown hugely. And therefore, I think you can see, I don't know whether this is 12 months, 18 months, 3 years down the line, but I think video contact centers or video customer experience will be another lane on that motorway of customer interaction. That'd be my, so there are areas that I'm intrigued with myself.
What about yourself, Ian?
I'm not too sure, to be honest, because coming into Connect just under 2 years ago, it opened a massive world of possibilities that I wouldn't have imagined before. So I'm really struggling to think of future things, if that makes sense. So I think at the moment, the biggest thing that interests me, at least, is machine learning and using that data to predict things. So next best action. What does a customer want to do? But going forward, I know we currently have some omni-channel stuff going on, but it still feels very siloed. So if I start a web chat, I end at web chat. I can't simply jump over to a different sort of media to say, seamlessly go to web chat. Actually, no, I need to talk to someone because I'm typing and I could not get myself across. Being able to then actually just speak to that person and that person have all that information to hand already. We've had that conversation. I think today, whilst those channels are there, if I talk on web chat and I've got to phone in, I've got to re-explain myself all over again. And there's no crossover of data between chat, voice, web apps, mobile apps, your personal account almost.
Yeah, that makes sense. We were talking about chatbots a little bit earlier, and we've had a question come through asking if you've had an example where there's any data on how many people get help from chatbots versus those that give up because the chatbot isn't giving you the answer to your question. I don't know if you've got any examples of that.
There's some stats starting to appear around this sort of stuff. So how good is that interaction from chatbots, etc., in the different channels? And I will generalize. So invariably, it's just less than 50%. That's high 40% is something I read probably earlier in the month of first time contact resolution across the contact center ecosystem, be it through voice or chat, etc. So there's a lot of room for improvement there, and this is where I think Ian, the machine learning piece I think really starts to play into that, and the AI is how can you make these chatbots more intelligent. And some of that intelligence is, on Ian's point, to recognise that they can't answer the question, and the fastest thing to do is get it to a human agent that can answer the question, rather than try and go backwards and forwards. So for me, that is probably where it is. So it's just under 50% from what I read recently on first point of resolution.
I think it'd be interesting to know kind of how that figure has changed over time. So 5 years ago, if I'd phoned up a system and I was greeted with a Lexbot almost, or some sort of natural language processing, I would have just sighed and gone, oh, this is not going to work, and try and get to an agent as soon as possible. Whereas today, and I don't know whether it's all these voice assistants that are coming out from Google and Amazon, but it is a hell of a lot better than it used to be, and I quite welcome these chatbots. I'm the sort of person that's keen to do stuff on my own and not have to rely on someone else or speak to someone. So if I can use a Lexbot to be able to complete that for me, then I'm all game for that. And personally, when I've used systems more recently compared to before, they're pretty good. Sometimes it struggles with my Birmingham accent. I talk slightly different and it's fine again. But yeah, I would say for my personal experience, again, it's more around the 75-80% that I get done what I want through a Lexbot that I couldn't have got done through DTMF, like press 1, 2, and 3, and so on.
So that's we're talking about the high 40% of queries get resolved with first contact using chatbots. So what sort of targets are you aware of that companies have for that figure? Do they want a lot higher than that, or is that?
Yeah. I mean, the aspiration clearly is to try and get it as near to 100%, I guess, as you possibly can. But obviously, there's cost on that would need to play into that. So there's a bit of a trade-off. And again, this is where self-service, the structured IVR menus, I call them. So press 1 for this, press 2 for that. They're quite restrictive. Whereas if you've got a natural language sort of situation where you can understand what the customer's intent is, then it opens up a bit more of how you can provide a greater level of self-serve as well, and therefore increase that propensity. And then when you get to an agent, the agent having all the right data to answer that question first and foremost, and not need to hand it off. And organizations will probably start to look at and it's been talked about ever since I've been involved in contact centers, so well over 25 years, as they talk about multi-skilled agents. That's easier said than done, okay, for a number of different reasons. But the more skill you can give to your agent, and some of that will be done through AI, etc., that we just talked about, the better. And therefore, getting your more experienced agents nearer the front of the queue from as far as customers are calling will also help. So there's a bit more work to be done there, but ideally you don't really want to be handing off anything. If you want to create a really good customer experience, you want to be dealing with it there and then if you can. Obviously there are scenarios which will need a follow-up process. It might need some correspondence and things like that, but invariably you want to be able to do that in a single hit and get that up into high 80s if not 90s of percent. So there's a bit of work to be done there. And some of the reasons why people can't get it first time is because the structure that I just talked about, it doesn't enable them. If you think about 3 months, I don't believe there was any IVR menus that mentioned COVID. And therefore, if you're phoning up about COVID, that didn't exist. Whereas organizations and companies are starting to introduce that type of thing. So they're starting to be able to filter these calls. And it could be COVID this time and it'll be something else another time. It's being able to introduce these things quickly that can then help with that customer experience and that first point of contact resolution.
Yeah, that makes sense. We touched on this earlier, but do you ever see customers stopping using the phone to contact organizations?
Personally, I might be on the wrong end of the age scale here, but my view is no, I don't think they will. And in fact, I read a study that came out of BT earlier this year. Well, actually, there's been an increase in people using the phone over the last 2 years. So I think it's still a very, very important channel. I think things will definitely change. To what extent, I don't know. But sometimes, and the real crux of the matter here is it so much easier to talk to somebody than to type things and write things down. And if you've got a complex situation or complex matter, it's so much easier to talk to somebody about that. And if you think about our own experiences, what we're all experiencing now, being locked down in our houses, etc., them 10-minute coffee conversations that you had by the vending machine or whatever, they become a little bit harder. It's not impossible, they become a little bit harder. and therefore picking up the phone can sometimes be the only way to answer them questions. But so I don't think it'll ever disappear. I think there would be a continual balance going forwards, and as the artificial intelligence and the machine learning continues to improve and develop, and that becomes more easier to consume, then and people's ability to and appetite to talk to these machines, which I think is growing, then that will balance. But there will be times, I think, where you're going to want to talk to somebody.
Yeah, and just to put a bit of a younger spin on it, I guess. So again, for me personally, I'm not a big fan of talking to people, but I think the queries that we have these days are a lot more complex than they used to be. So I think that the simple queries have dropped off quite a lot. But I think because of the complexities that we have in life now, that can't be automated at this point. I can't talk to someone about which is the best mortgage rate for me, for example. You need to speak to that person to find out about it. So yeah, from my point of view, I think that the simple queries have probably dropped off, but we've got a lot more complex queries out there that they need to speak to an agent, and that's why the kind of call volumes are still quite high up there.
And again, another thing, just building on that, I think the access to information, I think we as consumers have got much more access to information than we've ever had before. And I think that is generating potentially more questions for us. I know people are starting to get on trains again, but sitting on a train in the morning, people on their smartphones checking their bank balances or logging onto the shopping channel, whatever it might be that they want to do, because I've got information to hand, and therefore that generates questions. So there is something that's feeding that as well, is the access to information through websites or whatever it might be, and therefore raise questions by customers. And some of them questions need to be answered by humans.
Yeah, there's definitely always times where human interaction is the best way to solve a problem. So this might be one of our last questions, but this is a question from me, actually. I come from a software development background. And I was wondering how much sort of coding or development work is required to set up Amazon Connect, and an additional part of that is, how do you see the role of like a CX engineer becoming a big role in the future? Is it something that software engineers just now should become aware of and begin to explore?
Yeah, so it really depends on the size and the complexity of that contact center. If you're a really small company who just needs to get a call to an agent, then there's absolutely no coding involved at all. You can tick some boxes, click some things, and you can have that up and running pretty quickly. It's when you start to scale that coding starts to become a thing. So we like to have everything as what we call configuration as code. So all of our calls that we have come into the contact center come into a single flow, and we trigger a Lambda to go and get a configuration based on the number that's been dialed. And with that, we can determine kind of what's a welcome message, what queue should this go to, what are the opening hours, and set a bunch of configuration up so that when you need to create 1, 5, 10, 100 new phone lines, all it is updating your configuration as a table almost. You could pump a JSON file in there, and pretty quickly you've got all those phone lines set up. You don't have to manually create new contact flows for each one. So I think software development in the contact center space is going to grow pretty quickly, I think. So it's definitely something that we want to keep an eye on, because historically contact centers have been pre-built products, where you get what you're given. There's not that much space for development on that platform. But with AWS, you've got over 200 services that you could utilize and plug into your contact center, and that's just within AWS. You don't have to stay within AWS. If you've got something in Azure, for example, Amazon Connect can still talk to that.
Yeah, I think that's a really great summary there, Ian. And I think one of the things that really dawned on me, and in fact, I think Ian, you and I were, I think, at the same boot camp a few years ago, and one thing that really dawned on me was the power of the software engineering that sort of the Amazon Connect platform could enable. And it moves you away from being dependent on largely infrastructure. So you're not buying servers, you're not having to wire servers up, you're not having to find rack space in data centers, etc. And you don't need people to actually build them and things like that. So all of that sort of disappears. And then what happens is you get to play with the fun stuff. I think there's a massive, and we're seeing a lot of software engineering people looking at CX as being a space to move into. ECS as an organization have got a number of software engineers that are doing that today, and that's grown quite rapidly over the last 2 years, and I can only expect that to continue to grow. And again, enterprise organizations out there that might have their own application development teams, etc., all of a sudden they can start to build contact centers where before they couldn't. They would then typically engage with third parties or outsourced providers. Now they can build their own, and for me that creates huge opportunity, and that agility and being able to move at pace is really, really powerful from an organizational perspective. So from a software engineering point of view, I think it's a massive opportunity.
That's great. It's really interesting. It's definitely something I'll be keeping an eye on, both within ECS and outside. So that's pretty much all we've got time for just now. We're coming towards the end of the session. So I just want to thank everyone for joining, first of all. It's been great to have people on the stream and asking questions that they had. And I want to thank John and Ian as well for their time and answering the questions that the audience have asked and I've put to them. So this, as I said, this is the first AMA session that we will be running, but over the next few weeks, we've got sessions on leadership and DevOps. That's next week. We've got Agile and DevOps the week after that. And then the week after that, we've got containers. And then we'll probably put our QA one that didn't go so well last week at the end of that run. So keep an eye on our social media channels for those events. They'll be live on YouTube like this one was. And I just want to say, have a good weekend, everyone. And we hope to see you next time in our next AMA session. Thank you.
Cheers, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.